So here is your tech headlines for Monday, October 24th. Financial Times says a look at the long-term impact on TSMC's business, that's Taiwan Semiconductor, as the U.S. seeks to reduce its dependency on Taiwanese chips and cut China off from key semiconductor supplies. So now this topic, which has quite possibly been absolutely one of the big topics here at Tech News for the past, I don't know, year, the rest of the world's now catching up on. And indeed, the next story is sources. Chinese memory chip maker YMTC asks core U.S. staff to leave the company after its CEO stepped down ahead of the latest U.S. export controls announcement. So Washington's restrictions took a vital pipeline of talent away for China's semiconductor industry. And now the company's asking the core U.S. staff to leave the company. So, I mean, the American CEO is asking the other Americans at the company to step down. Maybe, I guess. And then Reuters says Chinese government data shows chip imports fell 12.4% year over year, and domestic chip production fell 10%. And while we're on the topic, I know one of the tweets coming up in a moment is from our friend Johan, and he shared a tweet that I'm retweeting now to the Tech News Twitter account, which is from ASPI.org. And who the hell's ASPI? Well, I didn't know myself, but it turns out it's the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, an independent, nonpartisan think tank focused on Australian defense, cyber, and tech. And their tweet says, after losing 80% of its global market share for smartphones, Huawei was left with no choice but to sell off its smartphone unit. With its latest move, the U.S. is now aiming to do to all of China what it did to Huawei, writes Carl Bildt, which is the former Foreign Secretary of Sweden. And yeah, Carl's right. And so is that tech bro who came in here a year ago and said that this is what was going to happen. And now it's happening. And now the rest of the world knows it's happening, including brilliant political minds like Carl Bildt from Sweden. And here we are. Yeah, America's trying to drive China into the dirt. We're going to freeze them wherever we can technologically, be it 2022, while the rest of the world quickly explodes into the near future with semiconductor that enable AI and VR and quantum and everything else. And we don't want China to get their hands on that Pandora's box, because God knows they'll use it against us, as they've given us plenty of cause to believe they will. And so we can't afford to let them have the power that comes along with this, all this new amazing new technology that's just around the corner with genetic engineering, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, we're trying to freeze them.
Tyler, especially on military, all
Yeah,
those
don't.
weapons.
Yes, so let's not even get started with all the military implications and applications. So, but yeah, now the secret's out. The rest of the world's like, oh yeah, looks like this is what America's doing. Yep, oh, yeah. I mean, it's just plain as day, and they're not fooling around. And people are even tweeting that, like, holy cow, this is happening incredibly fast. Governments generally don't move this fast. I can't think of another area where the government has been so effective and been so. We're not even waiting for China to attack Taiwan to inflict all of this. Although, boy, would that make it even easier, because we could get the rest of the world to join in a North Korea, Cuba like sanctions against China. And boy, would we be okay with that. And even if they took Taiwan, heaven forbid, what really, I mean, what really would they be getting if can you force Taiwanese scientists to continue to be brilliant and do their brilliant work by threat of execution? Can you get them to continue to make 3 nanometer chips at gunpoint? What exactly would you be? I understand you'll be getting physical geography. They'll be getting a bunch of buildings and infrastructure of different types. But can you force the key differentiator and distinction between Taiwan and China is Taiwan has competence in incredibly advanced technologies. Can you force them to reveal it and continue to develop it? I don't know that you can. So I don't know that attacking Taiwan or taking Taiwan would get them the long term net result that they would so desperately desire. Anywho, just food for thought. Because uh, Peter Zeihan had predicted a decade ago, and now others are starting to say the same. Well, the second Taiwan is attacked or invaded, uh, U.S. ships are going to block the Straits of Malacca off the coast of Singapore, and bye bye all energy. Not only energy imports that China so desperately needs, because half their energy is imported, but it's all of their trade going in or out of China, of which they are so incredibly dependent. And Peter, who predicted that this would likely be how this would all fall out, a decade ago, estimates that within a month, uh, you would have, the energy supply would get so low that Beijing would go dark, and within 6 months, you'd have 500 million dead from a famine. So they have, and this is why they're trying to build all of the land passages through Pakistan, as they've so heavily invested to get to the Middle East without being dependent on naval transport, because the naval transport can be easily stopped, as in the scenario that I just described. And they know that, and that's why they're spending hundreds of billions on the Belt and Road Initiative to build land-based transport for pipelines, etc. Uh, so now you know what's really going on, because they know that those are threatened, because they know they're going to try and take Taiwan, and they know that's going to be the recourse, and so they know they need a plan B. That's what the Belt and Road is really about. Okay, so that's the top story. Financial Times, TSMC, and they're just explaining what it is because people have no idea because they don't listen to tech news. So anyway,
I
the
think
next.
that it also it's a reflection of the that Xi Jinping officially has his third term as the uh, general secretary of the CCP. That is the highest leader of the both the CCP and the China. So that is so many experts, military experts from the U.S. said that there's gonna be a war within 5 years. Some even said this year. We read the news last week. But I think why, just like Tyler you said, we never see the speed that the U.S. administration did a sanction this quick. But I think that this was influenced, or this is influenced by this Russia invaded Ukraine, because some analysts said that, and I think so as well, because the dynamics changed because the U.S. administration realized it's better to prevent after uh, the sanction. Sorry, means if you do something beforehand, it's better than you do the sanction after the war happened. So this is one of the measures that might help to prevent the war happened immediately. Oh, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, so the next big tech story is Bloomberg says they have sources. Sounds, well, let me guess, Mark Gurman with Apple. If you guessed
Yeah.
Mark Gurman and Apple, you guessed correctly. Mark Gurman's source over there at Apple, who just, holy cow, I can't recall the last time a journalist made a career out of a single source from Apple or any company. Mark is just,
This guy has been doing this for at least 5 years.
it's
And it,
unbelievable the amount of content Bloomberg's getting from this leaker in Apple. I really hope this person is being incredibly handsomely compensated.
I think he was headhunted to Bloomberg. I think he went straight to Bloomberg after he graduated. He was already
No,
working
he
on
was
Apple
somewhere
before
else
he
first.
graduated. Not, I
He
think
was
it's 9 to 5 Mac. But the thing is, he was actually a student at the time doing internship,
oh
so it's like
right.
part-time work. Yeah, but he got kind of hired by Bloomberg straight after he graduated.
Uh-huh. Because he had sources at Apple. He probably
Yeah,
has he probably has an uncle.
a
So
partner maybe.
the sources, Mark's sources at Apple say that a 14-inch and a 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 Pro and an M2 Max and an M2 Mac Mini are coming soon. Apple tests a Mac Pro with 24 CPU cores, 72 GPU cores, and 192 gigabytes of RAM. I cannot wait for the demonstration of the Mac Pro with the M2s. Holy smokies, is that going to be a fun demonstration to watch? That will be,
That must be a metaverse machine. It's
it's
a
practically a
machine for
supercomputer. It's finally
right.
what would have been just 10 years ago considered a supercomputer. Uh, will now be viable. Although I can't imagine what the price tag will be, but definitely
About 10.
within reason, I imagine. 24.
Well, those guys who work with Apple and on Apple designs um, typically spend 10 grand at least on a machine. The designers, but of
Yeah.
course they're all being replaced by AI. So
Next up, interviews with TikTok moderators in Colombia, contracted via teleperformance, describe pay as low as $10 per day, and being exposed to horrific content, long hours, and more. Let's manage the
and
cookies.
how does that differ with any other social media moderator
Very much.
from any other country?
I don't think it
There,
does.
well,
Yeah, because
right.
the Philippine-based, which does an incredible amount of content moderation for the likes of Facebook and whatnot, are making in the ballpark as well. So this starts off with a story about Luis, a 28-year-old student from Colombia, works through the night moderating videos for TikTok. During the day, he tries to get some sleep, but sometimes the videos haunt his dreams.
And he
He,
is going to have PTSD for the rest of his life because he took this fancy job.
he remembers one video taken at a party with two people holding what initially looked like a piece of meat. When they turned around, it appeared they were holding skin and gristle, which had been flayed off human faces. Quote, the worst thing was that the friends were playing games and started using the human faces as masks, he said. Luis reeled off a list of the kind of content he sees on a regular basis: murder, suicide, pedophilia, pornographic content, accidents, and cannibalism. For Carlos, a former TikTok moderator, is this yeah. So we're done with Luis. Carlos, a former TikTok moderator, it was a video of child sexual abuse that gave him nightmares. The video showed, I'm not even going to describe it because I don't want to give you nightmares. And I hit him particularly, he said, because his father doesn't know. Horrific videos such as these are part of and parcel of everyday work for TikTok moderators in Colombia. Yeah, obviously. TikTok's rapid growth in Latin America, the workers interviewed, uh, work with content, but were contracted through teleperformance. Yep, okay.
Hey, Tyler, I left a job where I was actually managing a team that does exactly that, like 2008,
Mm-hmm.
um, Microsoft Family Safety, and it's one of the most horrific jobs that you can ever have. The things that you see will scar you for life. So it's not an easy job.
Right, but certainly they must be told this when they go in for the interview. Yes.
Nothing can prepare you for what you're going to see. No matter what how bad that people will explain it to you, it's gonna be worse.
right,
And they're young and they want a job.
but certainly they must be told exactly what you just said, right?
Yeah, you can throw like blanket statements, but then you see something that you would have never guessed in like your worst nightmares would happen, and you'll see it right there. And
So,
you pack your stuff, and leave that day.
right. So, but there are people who, and it's some form of psychopathy, or sociopathy, that that
That enjoy this stuff.
not enjoy it, but aren't impacted by it in the same way that a quote unquote normal person would be. That don't have this same um, empathetic reaction, because what the reaction that you're describing is based on and essentially kind of sympathy and empathy, of which these people uh, uh, essentially lack, and thus they. And by the way, it's often said that the best surgeons in the world are also often uh, able to be the best surgeons, precisely for this reason.
That's that's a rationalization. That's
Hmm.
Yeah.
it's really not true. Please,
Okay.
Yes,
let,
please, Tyler.
let's kill that generalization. There are fantastic surgeons who are great human people.
And
Okay.
I want to share that all kind of training, medical training, cannot prepare you for what you see in the trauma, like your trauma rotation in ER. Nothing in this world can prepare you for what you actually see in the ER. No matter how desensitized they try to make you by training, years of training,
But
nothing can.
now
So,
you're giving more kind of point. You're kind of supporting my point by saying that.
Well, Tyler,
yeah,
you
but
know what?
surgeons are not psychopath or sociopath. That's not the reason they can control their responses. It's years of training, and I mean, I don't want to even go there. There is no comparison actually. But I understand your point. Perhaps you are trying to isolate the people who perhaps naturally maybe don't have that kind of emotional response or empathy, perhaps
Right.
those sociopaths, and replacing them for this job. That's perhaps that's where you're
Right.
going.
Right.
But
And
I
wait,
just
Well,
wanted to.
should
Isn't that
Oh,
called compartmentalization though? Because I have friends that work forensics and they have sympathy, they have empathy, but it's one exposure to it, but it's also a bit of compartmentalization. It's not to say that they're unfeeling, it's just that they handle they handle what's feeling in the moment differently, or they, put it aside to handle it later.
Well,
Yeah, that's true.
there's two types of detachment, and they're conflated into a single word. One type of detachment is you just shut off your emotions, and do it sort of systematically. The other form of detachment is where you realize and there's a saying in critical care that the first thing to do when you arrive at a code blue when someone's dying is check your own pulse so that you center yourself so that you become very situationally aware and not emotionally distracted. And doing that is part of the professional training, is to keep a cool head. And the best surgeons are those who are indeed quite compassionate, quite empathetic, but can use the second form of detachment where they can and it in some ways you could call it compartmentalization, but it really is different when applied in a surgeon being in what's a life-threatening patient for a life-threatening situation for their patients. So I don't think the ability to detach emotionally from a situation where your emotions can hurt others is an exception to empathy. I think it is a derivative of empathy that you can do that because you want to save their lives and you don't want your emotional reactions to interfere with your ability to do that. But when the situation is stabilized, you are very much capable of returning to a fully empathic state because then that becomes therapeutic in that situation. So it's really a matter of regulating what emotional connection with people you have is therapeutic in the context.
Wouldn't it also, I'm agreeing with everything you are saying, and I'm just thinking that if you would be truly non-empathic, like a true, like absolutely don't have empathy, then surely you wouldn't be a good moderator anyway.
Actually, I agree with John. It's the situational detachment that you are ingrained with, and this motto that, first of all, do no harm. So, in that situation, your emotional are interfering with your performance. So, you need to cut that out and focus completely on the task at hand, which is saving the patient's life. And you prioritize somebody else's well being over your own well being in that moment or that time. After the task is done, after you are done whatever the process is in front of you, then you allow yourself to go through that emotional reaction, which is sometimes very strong, and for that you need to go and talk to some experts sometimes, depending. I remember the first time ever that situation after running the code. I wanted to cry after everything was done. I really wanted to cry, but my senior told me, this is not for this time, is not for you. You need to go and deliver the news to the family, and you need to make sure that they receive this news in a way that, like, you need to take care of their responses right now. So first you do that. After doing that, he said, now it's time for you to go in the room over there and deal with your emotions. And then I went in there and I cried. And I cried so much. And I'm like, oh my God, it's my fault and blah, blah, blah. But later on, repeated, like when you get exposure to this kind of repeated training, you develop this thing that, oh, right now my job is to do this, and later on I'll deal with my emotion. And you do deal with your emotion. But people like me, I couldn't do it, and that's why I don't do it anymore, because it was affecting my health. So many of these surgeons, they do feel everything, because my grandfather was a surgeon. My family, there are surgeons and physicians all over. I know what they go through afterwards. So they feel very deeply, but they are just very good at detaching themselves in the moment, and afterwards they allow themselves to go through the entire.
I think that's
Yeah, I can,
also,
I can, I can
sorry,
give
John.
you, yeah, I can give you numerous examples from personal experience. I flew life flight helicopters, did lots of trauma scenes, and the one that always sticks out in my mind the most is a woman who was in the middle of labor and died, and had a midwife at home. And I had to do a C-section on the living room floor because the mother was dead, the baby was dying, and so detaching in order to do the C-section on a living room floor and then resuscitate the baby and then fly it back to the hospital and hand it off required every bit of focus imaginable. But mixed in amongst that, I had to go in the back bedroom and tell the husband and three children um, that their mother was not going to make it. We were going to do everything we could to help the baby survive. And in that conversation, I had to let my empathy flow, but in a regulated way. So, as Aram said, so I didn't break down and cry, because that's not therapeutic in that context. But I can tell you, when I handed that baby off, I cried my eyes out and couldn't even talk about that event for a year. And it wasn't the uh, the C-section that was the traumatic part. It was telling the family that their wife and mother was no longer with us, and those are those are very, very difficult moments. But you can do that when your focus is not on you, but your focus is on what is the most therapeutic thing that I can do with the skills and the emotional regulation that I have.
Now, the difference between these guys who work on content filtering and actual doctors who work on the ER is that doctors have a lot of training. They go to medical school to actually, deal with trauma, and they see bodies and all sorts of cadavers and stuff. So really prepared for this. But a kid coming out of college or still going to college, they're usually like a computer science major or something. The last thing that they can think of is watching some gore or something really horrible in front of them. Nothing, you can talk to them about it, but it's not going to prepare them like the medical students who actually deal with this day in and day out. So it's they will have a lot of emotional baggage to deal with in these situations. And I'm telling you, the turnover rate for that kind of job is so high. It's really hard to keep people in, and paying people $10 a day, or what was it, a week? Yeah, a day, is such a low rate that nobody is going to actually, they can do anything else and not have to deal with this kind of emotional, horrifying moments that they have to go through every day.
Wasn't the idea that we train AI to learn what's vile and what's not, and that ultimately they could be replaced by AI with enough training data? And why isn't that being done?
It is been done. It's been done since like 2006. I think University of Alabama had like a center for dealing with that kind of stuff, where AI can understand a lot of the content in pictures, but there still are things that it's not that good at, and it will detect things like skin and whatever, especially for the case of pornographic content. But for other things, it will not be that easy. So yeah, it's being used like for at least 10 or 15 years in machine learning, doing figuring out what the content is for inside an image.
Yeah, it currently is about 5 to 10% of content moderation is being done algorithmically. Oh, but obviously the idea is that it will eventually do all of it. So this is hopefully, knock on wood, a short term problem. But on to the next one. As President Xi Jinping consolidates his grip on China's ruling party, Alibaba and, well, as BB was saying, one of the biggest things that happened since we met, last on Friday, was that Xi Jinping was approved for a third term and consolidated power there, and he's now kind of the new most powerful person on the planet. And as a result of that, China's big tech companies like Alibaba, JD, Naspers, and others have dropped another 10%. US listed Chinese stocks tumbled in pre market trading, with investors spooked by President Xi's tightening grip on China's ruling party.
Tyler, how many terms can a president have in China?
Oh,
And
They just changed the rules so that
yeah.
he can stay forever. I mean they were planning that 5 years ago, or yeah. So did we were talking about who and his escorting off the playing field. Do you guys want to, that was really early on. Can we see if anybody has any more details on the former
We talked about
Hu
leader?
this
Jintao
earlier
is,
at the start.
yeah, it's the former secretary, general secretary, or you can say chairman of the Chinese National Congress. Anyway, it's just like David said originally, it's not a fixed law. It's like a custom after Deng Xiaoping. It's a little bit complicated, but originally the idea is one leader have two terms as the general secretary, left the power from what's the power position in China, and they have just like princelings and packs and the youth league faction, and the Jiang is the Shanghai clique. So normally they were uh, negotiate and have a leader, one from this pack this time for 10 years, another will have not the next time for another 10 years. Originally that's the idea, but she breaks the idea. So right now he can extend the terms as long as he want, because he already changed the constitution this time, and the constitution inside the CCP as well. Because in China, you have to think that the Communist Party, is bigger or heavier or powerful, more powerful than the National Congress. So he can change the constitution. That means, as he wish, as long as he wants, he can do whenever he wants to step down. But in China, you have to be tough, otherwise you will be devoured by your competitors as well. So basically, he won't step down.
Okay, next up is FTX plans to offer $6 million to account holders impacted by a phishing incident via a third party site, but says this kind of relief will not become the norm. And The Verge is doing a review of the 10th generation iPad, and they say it has great performance and battery, lots of apps, and USB-C, but accessories are confusing and expensive, and an average display. Next from Bloomberg, the Coterie, which lets founders access funds from Cotu, Andreessen Horowitz, and others to sidestep illiquid stock, raised $40 million from Andreessen Horowitz. And Wall Street Journal says they have sources that U.S. banks backing Elon Musk's Twitter deal plan to hold all $13 billion of debt on their balance sheets rather than selling it amid a difficult debt market. And researchers find thousands of repos on GitHub offering fake proof of concept exploits for various vulnerabilities, with many of them containing malware instead. IKEA has something called Dirigera, and The Verge is doing a review of IKEA Dirigera, which is IKEA's smart home hub, and it is compliant and compatible with the whole new Matter consortium, which unites all hardware and software manufacturers, which is handy. And so the Smart Home Hub by IKEA is easy to use and works well, but is expensive, lacks a migration tool from the previous version of IKEA Home, which was called Trådfri, which means wireless, basically, and is simplistic. Yeah, well, IKEA is going to be simplistic because it's for your grandparents, you idiot. Um, Easier to use and stable, but let's check in again after a few months, they said about IKEA's smart home system. The
That
next,
they're just on the IKEA system. Their system is just it's Zigbee, and so is Philips Hue, and so are a bunch of others. And you don't need these people's hubs, and you don't need to buy into their system. I've got a bunch of IKEA lights. I've got a bunch of Philips Hue lights. I've got a bunch of other people's makes lights, and I don't use any of their hubs. If they're Zigbee, you don't need it. We forget that Zigbee is the other protocol in the house
right.
alongside Wi-Fi. It's low power, it's low bandwidth, but it meshes. It's got some advantages. And yeah, we just don't need to use these people's ecosystems or hubs. So you can use Home Assistant or Node-RED or whatever with just a single dongle, which replaces all of these manufacturers' hubs, um, Philips Hue, IKEA, and so forth, and then control these things directly without being beholden to yet another app on
Yeah.
your phone.
The
I
problem is
personally have
the average consumer knows nothing about what you just
yeah,
said
it's
and
not
relies
the
on,
most user
Best
friendly.
Buy or IKEA or Google or Apple to kind of tell them what to do, which
Yeah,
is,
indeed.
a challenge.
But it's worth being aware of, right? They won't be aware of it unless people make them aware of it. So every time you install one of those hubs, you're installing yet another Zigbee hub. They all interfere with each other. They give you a crappy app ecosystem, and yet the hardware is sometimes quite reasonable. And also watch out for Philips Hue. Philips Hue is good, but it's very, very overpriced for what it is. There are plenty of other manufacturers who make multicolor, variable brightness LEDs that are also Zigbee that are just a fifth of the price, roughly, for the same thing. So yeah, worth looking at what you can do yourself. But little geeky, save a lot of time, save a lot of money, save having a whole screen of apps to control your smartphone devices when
Well,
you're using
isn't
these
the
things.
Matter standard going to, interop everything and it'll all work nicely together, even, non Zigbee with
Let's
Matter?
let's see and see how it actually pans out.
Okay, next up is Binance. Who cares about this Binance story? Well, it's just that Binance is much bigger than FTX, essentially 55% market share in crypto trading in the past 24 hours. Okay. New York Times says ahead of the US midterms, political campaigns are using voter profiling companies and vast amounts of data, that's sweet, sweet, juicy data, to target campaign ads on guns, vaccines, and QAnon and everything else. Yeah, so basically politicians are taking part in using data to do what every educated uh, business is using data these days, and politicians are no exception. Animoca Brands co-founder rejects a report that the sandbox had 500 daily active users, saying the virtual world has over 200,000 monthly active users. Next, whereas creator economy companies have mostly built infrastructure for the top 1% of creators, new AI tools will fuel business that democratizes creativity, is a piece from Lightspeed Venture Partners. And Iran's Atomic Energy Agency says hackers breached its email system. Hacking group Black Reward leaked 50 gigabytes of emails and power plant construction plans. Iranian activists smuggle Starlink receivers into the country for a backup internet, citing no Starlink donation from SpaceX nor government participation. And now we're going to find out what happens when Starlink black market happens in a country where the government doesn't approve of it. Because we've debated this rather extensively, and now we're really going to. Someone's finally putting theoretical into actual practice.
A bunch of folks have been doing that in Sudan, where they're not allowed to have Starlink.
Okay. Wall Street Journal says a profile of e-commerce company Misho, which accounts for 7% of India's sales. The Guardian says in his memoir, Bono talks about his deal he did with Steve Jobs on the iPod back in 2004 and with Tim Cook in 2014. And now the Wire drama with Facebook and this ongoing drama. The Wire now retracts two recent stories about Facebook's X-Check program and says it is using quote unquote independent external experts to investigate its coverage, which means they know they fucked up. And that's a very civilized political way of saying, oh, we fucked up. So it looks like Facebook won that round. That's what I'm getting from this. The Verge says Indian news outlet The Wire retracts its story on Meta. Washington Post says the UK's communication regulator issues its first report on video services. Anyway, next up, South China Morning Post. Smartphone shipments in India fell 6% year over year. Xiaomi units fell 18%, followed by Samsung with 18%. Interpol unveils a metaverse for law enforcement around the world, letting agents tour the virtual version of its HQ, taking training courses in VR and more. There you go. Those are your big boring headlines for today. And now we get into the tweets. Did anybody have a tweet since we met on Friday?
Hey, Tyler, you didn't cover this. The Interpol unveils a metaverse for law enforcement around the world, letting agents tour the virtual versions of its HQ, taking training courses in virtual reality. Interpol. Did you
Okay.
see?
Yeah. Dad is first particular. Oh, Evan, you just shared one about a Brit that got a bank card implant. I thought I heard Evan's voice a moment ago.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was in Sweden this time, but I know that was kind of the rage in Sweden at some point, or at least the
Exactly
media
right.
made it seem
Exactly
to
right.
be. But payments, evidently this guy didn't realize you could get an Apple Watch and just use that for Apple Pay. But yeah, so chip implant for payments.
Right. I'm going to explain that noise you just heard in a second. But you're exactly right in that Sweden has been doing this for a very long time, and on a very small scale. It's generally based around a co-working one of the co-working spaces in central Stockholm, and one of the members who works there who happily implants people if they want it. And anyway,
Yeah, you could
I'm
make it
sitting
Zigbee so it could
here.
work with Ben's hub.
I'm sitting right here, right now, Tyler,
oh, you're
epicenter.
at the epicenter. So Sarah's happened to be calling in today from the location I speak of, which is
And you
not
have
that.
a chip implant or no?
Of course, since
Oh,
several years. I think it was when they opened, was it,
are you
Tyler?
serious?
Yeah, and I'm
Oh
going to
my
take
god.
it out, actually. That's what many here are beginning to do.
I
But
didn't know if you could detect the uh, lack of excitement in my voice for being in Stockholm. This is incredibly old pedestrian news of people having chips to open doors and identify themselves and everything else. Um,
yeah, when did they launch here, Tyler? Because it was when Epicenter were opening.
yes, so
Six,
that would have been
six
around
years ago,
20,
he said 6 years ago.
about 2015, I would say.
Yeah.
So has it been? Why are you taking it out? It sounds like it's working.
Well, I've spoken to several here who I mean, Johan and so on, that you're very familiar with, where there were a couple of security issues. But I'm going to check out more about that before I actually do it. But I booked the time to take it out. But I think it's really cool. I mainly use it to open the doors here, but it's just a fun thing.
Okay,
What is it, Sarah? Is it low frequency RFID or what is it?
I think Tyler himself probably knows the specs better than I do, but it's something like that. I'm not
It's probably
that familiar.
RFID if you just wave it nearby.
Yeah,
Yes, the
he
only
said.
thing with that is
Yeah,
it's super easy to clone. I mean,
they're
anyone with a
nodding
flip
here.
is
They're nodding here next to me.
Did did
I,
uh, did Bill Gates implant it with 5G?
no, that's the next version. Um, okay, I have a Reuters article here about it. The tech startup Epicenter has developed a microchip implant capable of storing COVID-19 vaccine information. Plus, some social media users claim the examples of humans. Anyway, so I'll pin this to the top of the room here. Oh, we're doing the tweets right now. So let me just tweet this article out that I just found about Stockholm kind of being an early user of chip implanting. And
I'm trying to ping in our mutual friend Patrick Hamilton Walsh because he just took his out on Friday. So I want to ask him
oh, yeah.
how that went and why. I'm trying to
Yep.
ping him in.
Okay, great. So, interesting that he has it, by the way, for reasons I'll say when he gets here. And by the way, to explain that sound you heard in the background, it goes to one of the interesting tweets that I found over the weekend, which is this. There was a VC who was asking his following on Twitter about um, kind of Dolly 2 for music, meaning text prompt generated content. AI generated content from text prompts, which is what DALL-E 2 is, where you put in a text prompt, you get images, surprisingly good images. Now you're starting to get videos as well. And what about music? And of course, there is some music. And that I saw one of the responses led me to this video of there's a category of music called new metal, which you're about to hear. And I used to, back in my earliest music days, I was started cut my musical chops on kind of metal guitar playing and everything, and briefly played in a metal band, not a hair metal band, but and so I kind of know the genre fairly well. But it has evolved and it's become more like a hybrid between EDM and metal. It's called new metal, and so here you can now listen to AI generated new metal. Are you ready for this? Here we go. And then, by the way, this is being listened to by a YouTuber who is a lover of new metal, and he's giving his thoughts as a lover of new metal, and his YouTube channel is all about new metal. And somebody showed this to him, and now he's responding to it. So here you go.
Dude, this is just like actual Jen. Oh, dude, we're so computers are so taken over. This literally just sounds like most modern gent bands. Like this is actually really scary. This kind of goes hard. Oh my god, I'm literally headbanging into a computer right now. Like this is so up, dude. This is so up. Like y'all that think like y'all got like musicians ain't gonna have jobs real soon. Like the other ones were funny. This one's actually fucking insane if this is real. Is this available on Spotify? Yes, although not these exact songs, but you can listen to music generated by this program here. Dude can make infinite amounts of fucking albums because he doesn't need to write anything and then put them on Spotify. Bro, I actually am so curious how the he did this. This is insane. No one's talking about this.
If you haven't seen it yet, here's a quick sneak peek on how that sounds.
So now he's watching a video of the creator of it explain it.
This is just modern metal. What the fuck? No wonder people complain that everything sounds the same because the fucking computer is writing it.
I had an idea of a program that would just randomize rhythms played on an open string forever. I hacked together a small program in Unreal
That's
Engine
all that Gent is anyways.
for over a week, and when I should have been studying, that just played open strings over and over again.
Perhaps not a coincidence that this guy sounds incredibly Swedish. By the way, that's a very Swedish accent that he has.
Tyler, I spent the weekend trying out AI software,
Yes.
um, the the kind that I would be using um, in my own business if I were still in my own business. I tried one called Smashing Logo and one called, I think, Brand Watch, and both of those made logos from a list of suggestions that you gave them. And then I tried about two or three AI writing programs. And I can only say that while I still think I'm a better writer, the brand the brand apps, which were the art, if you were careful enough about what to tell them, they could tell you, they could give you a logo suitable for a small business. It's like I've seen enough small business logos generated by amateur artists to know that most small businesses don't have better logos than what the AI generated. And as far as the blog posts and stuff that I tried, it was not interesting, not distinctive, but if you wanted it for increasing your SEO, it was perfectly adequate.
Right. But on that point, I saw today a really interesting article about a somebody was having a conversation with GPT-3, which was it was a typical impressive conversation that you have with GPT-3, and GPT-3 was describing some imaginary thing that exists in some sci-fi realm. It was trying to describe an object that exists in a sci-fi world, that some tools that were made to make the pyramids or something. And then the human says to the GPT-3, "Hey, could you give me a Dolly 2 prompt that I can put into Dolly 2 to see what these things look like?" And it gave it to him. And he took the prompt and put it in Dolly 2,
Oh, wow.
and it made an image of what these tools that made the pyramids look like. It was what a wild idea that you're asking one AI to provide you an input to give to another AI.
Well, it is wild, but in about 2 years, it's going to be over the place. I mean, all creativity, art, music, and writing, it's on and marketing, all done by AI. It's a good thing I'm old.
It blew my mind that because the mind blowing aspect of that is, of course, the AI will likely know better text prompts than humans will in many cases because it's like asking itself or scratching itself, But
Oh, that's a good point.
so, How long do we imagine humans are going to be the superior uh, prompt narrators, for lack of a want of a better word, because the terminology hasn't really been properly coined yet, as far as I'm aware. And anyway, um,
The term, just by most people, I think the term is emerging as prompt engineering,
yeah,
or at least that's kind of what I've heard it referred to on places like Asianometry or John Coogan's show. With respect to, I think, what these models can do, it is impressive. But if you look at something like industry applications, I think that's a really untapped opportunity there, specifically in the science realm. So I did some experiments myself as well with something like Dolly and asking for, hey, what question should I ask if I'm trying to understand DNA? And just asking a simple question like that, and it went through variations of prompts, and then I fed that into images, and then it gave me images, and I was able to kind of just explore in a very childlike way just by asking stupid questions. So I think that is kind of very, very lucrative if you can understand what it's doing there in terms of the prompts. They're not necessarily answering what you're saying; they're kind of trying to predict what you meant to have said, and it's a very interesting exercise. So if folks haven't tried that, definitely give that a shot.
okay. So the next tweet that I have here is, well, while we have you, Eric, you just had one about COVID and another about AI models. Take them in either order.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of, I guess the way that technology is progressing with genetic engineering, I think it's nice to see also because it's kind of topical in terms of China. The lab leak hypothesis, which was originally dismissed by everyone, very uniformly across the board, I think now has kind of come back into light, and we're seeing researchers release publications or papers that kind of discuss these details, but nobody wants to do the, I guess,
Georgie.
academic or career suicide and get it peer reviewed. Most peer review places don't want to touch that because there are consequences here. So, from the perspective of international collaboration, one thing that I don't like about this quote unquote Cold War is before the Russians and the Americans talked to each other, but now we're not necessarily talking with our quote unquote enemies. And I think that's potentially a big time bomb, so to speak. So I think that was kind of the more interesting one. If people had some comments about that with respect to China.
Yeah, there was actually a great discussion by a legal scholar on an analysis of globalization and impact on labor and impact on investors and impact on international relations. And one of the comments she made is that there are formal studies indicating that one um, negative act from one country against another was 5 times more powerful than a positive act in terms of building relationships and collaboration. And so, and she made specific reference to U.S.-China relations in that discussion, that treating another nation like an enemy pushes them towards assuming the role of the enemy. And this is a nation state observation that mirrors what happens between two individuals. If someone treats you as an enemy, you assume that they're going to continue treating you as an enemy, therefore they are your enemy, therefore you behave like an enemy. And so to the extent that um, China has done provocative things and the U.S. has responded in kind, we are making enemies of each other.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate things. Like specifically for me, like I loved kind of the story of how American scientists could always work with Russian scientists, and famously, it was on Voices from DARPA podcast, the Mister Thousand Satellites episode. Specifically, they said, my name is Rusty. In America, people call me Rusty. That's just my nickname. But the Russians, the counterparts in the space program, didn't want to call me Corrosion. They thought it was wrong that someone would be called Corrosion, and I thought, oh wow, that's an interesting example of a little Russian sauce when you compare one culture versus the other. But now that's gone. That kind of so I really do hope that maybe the generations of people can look past their histories. I think maybe the new generation of folks in China, maybe the new generation of folks in America, don't have to bring the baggage from the previous conflicts. Because I don't know how many people are actually vested in these conflicts personally. I think most of the people in China have very little connection to the kind of I don't know what you would call it, animosity that some of the older folks from China might have towards America. So I think as that fades away, things might get a little bit better. But
Yeah, and that podcast I was referring to is on Freakonomics. It's a really excellent analysis of globalization. And one of the things that she alluded to is that historically, the Chinese tried to emulate everything American, and they did. If you visited China even as recently as a decade ago, there was great admiration for the U.S. And watching what's happened here in the last 5 or 6 years, their discussion has shifted from how do we better emulate them to how do we avoid the pitfalls of what they've done to themselves. And so that conversation in this context has really shifted. But I'd really recommend people listen to the Freakonomics um, topic podcast on globalization. It's really quite enlightening.
This is Albert. I wanted to mention about the Chinese lab leak, that the new book by David Quammen, The Breathless, just came out in October, and it goes into the history of COVID in great depth, great detail. And essentially, what it says is that the lab leak story hasn't changed much as far as the science goes. What's changed is the media play on it that goes up and down over time. But I recommend that book by David Quammen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good synthesis of or analysis, because there's evidence for and against, and since the definitive information no longer exists, if it ever existed, I don't think we'll ever know the answer, and so it's just going to be subject to the vacillations in global China relations, and there's unlikely to be a scientific difference. And with respect to how to overcome the current animosity and lack of conversation that Eric was referring to, Max Planck, the physicist, once said that old scientific ideas die one scientist at a time. And I don't think we're going to um, likely see a reconciliation until the leaders of the major powers somehow are succeeded by younger replacements who can take a fresh look and not bring that baggage to the table and reconstruct. Because a world where the three superpowers are not speaking to each other is not a safe world to be in.
Okay, Here we go with more tweets. A May found one from Decrypto that Russia proposes a 3 years jail sentence for undeclared crypto wallets. And Phil
For
found
what crypto walls? I couldn't get the
un-
other part.
unclaimed. You have to register your crypto wallet with the government, and if you have a wallet that is found and it wasn't registered, you get up to 3 years in jail.
Oh, that's a new way for them to recruit for their military.
Tyler,
Yeah,
did you also see the latest and the greatest on the IRS updating the 1040 form?
no,
For 2022, the IRS has updated the 1040 form to include NFTs if you have purchased NFTs and to declare them. So
okay.
they've really made the adjustment to the form. And there's like about a 112-page document that the IRS put out there that's a draft. I guess it was leaked or something, but
Hmm.
I'll
What
see
if
if
they're
I can
not
tweet it
worth
out.
anything?
Well, you could actually, Dr. Francine, that's interesting because you will be able to reclaim the loss. So they
Wow,
are
that's
making it like,
awesome.
so like if you have NFTs that have been like crap, with all due respect, you definitely could. It seems like they
Which
are
is almost all of mine.
exactly. Well, look at
Well,
the
do you
bright
have
side.
to?
Maybe you
Just a
might be
quick
able to get.
question: Do you have to?
Go
Do you
ahead.
have to declare like an art purchase? Like when you go to a Christie's auction, I thought NFTs would be similarly regulated to that, although that industry is famously not that well regulated. So, um, is there any more information regarding why that was made the case?
No, I didn't get a chance to read all those 100 pages, but I'm happy to tweet it out if someone wants to skim it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
And by the way, just because they're asking you to declare whether you had NFTs doesn't mean necessarily that the losses would be tax deductible. You know, that's a whole. I don't even know. I mean, that's a whole regulatory process at a minimum, if not statutory. I think it's probably closer to like, do you have foreign bank accounts where they just ask you to declare yes or no, just because they think that if you've got money in crypto, you've got money in NFTs, or if you have money in the Cayman Islands, you might be hiding money. So they want to basically put you on the hook of having to declare that you even like transacted in it. It's a different issue than whether losses are tax deductible.
Well, we don't even know which agency will finally come down to be regulating NFTs, whether it'll be the commodities
Right, but that's
futures.
also different from the tax issue, by the way.
Yeah.
I guess
Moving
it's
along.
safe to say the honey.
Hmm? Sam?
I was just saying it's safe to say that the honeymoon is over for all the crypto NFT, safe havens that people thought that they can put the stuff in and not be regulated.
Well, we're getting into the real, decentralized, centralized battle royale, where the stakes are getting higher. Governments are getting their plans ready.
Yeah, my bets are on central banks. They know how to enforce these things.
Well, it's wild,
Tyler,
right? We had that story a few weeks ago where the Cayman Island normally, hey, you everything's fine. Oh no, they filed the paperwork wrong. What do you mean? I thought these tax havens were untouchable. So I think that era is also coming to an end. So interesting to see it.
Tyler, I'd probably have to agree with. Was that Eric that was speaking? I think that was Eric, wasn't it? Eric,
Yeah,
was that you?
yeah.
Yeah, there was. That's also something interesting because that's also happening with Puerto Rico. I've just heard from some of my friends and family on the island as well that there is some heavy, heavy, heavy push to remove the crypto bros that are actually kind of nested in San Juan. That because they're literally the people are really, really not happy with the fact that they're there, and they're really pushing back against that act that allows them to live there 180 days because they're really not contributing to the island at all. They're literally just, using all the resources and keeping to their own little cluster, the exclusive cluster, and it's impacting the island because then there's no sort of there's no sort of economy moving through if everyone's just going to be sort of pacifying one region and one group, one demographic. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see that Puerto Rico might actually also push that out. And I think Bad Bunny is having a huge impact on that, moving them out. And not only that, Portugal has already started to talk about this, and I'm heading to speak on a stage soon in Portugal. And I know for a fact Portugal is already starting to shift what they allowed to come in with crypto, because their people are already being pushed out of the city of Lisboa. And it's not like, I remember when I used to go to Lisboa and I would pay something like $50 or something, like to stay in a nice decent hotel, right? Now it's like, wow, this is crazy. Now it's like almost 1,000 for the same place. It's like sick how much everything's almost increased like tenfold, just because of the entrance of all the crypto companies and the metaverse and Web3 companies that are wanting to go there. And the government of Portugal is actually re-looking that, which they allowed to come in, they're now considering to put a crypto tax so that it sort of slows down that entrance, because it doesn't have the infrastructure to take that power of a number of people traveling and coming in and living there. Just is the infrastructure is not ready for that. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how many of these places, and the gentleman that said it, I wouldn't necessarily agree that central banks are the way, but I would say that there's going to be a number of elements that'll be hybrid, and also a number of things that will just probably revert a bit back, because I think people are very excited about jumping on this gravy train, but the reality is not really seeing the impact of the long term by jumping on that gravy train.
And don't forget, Emmy, hey girl, they end up
Hey,
outpricing the locals most of the time. That's what's happening in both, Emmy and I are both, our families are from Puerto Rico. And my father ended up coming back to the States because Ponce is getting outpriced by these people who come there for the tax breaks. They don't contribute and they want to use all the resources and everything else and party and stuff and drive up prices but not contribute.
Okay. The next tweet is from Phil that a U.S. company sold iPhone hacking tools to spies from the United Arab Emirates. An American cybersecurity company was behind the 2016 iPhone hack sold to a group of mercenaries and used by the United Arab Emirates. What's interesting about that is I wonder if the article mentions this. I bet it probably should. Let me search if it mentions the word Bezos. It doesn't, which is interesting because it's believed that it might have been the UAE who hacked Jeffrey Bezos's phone, which led to his divorce. Anyway,
Oh, interesting. Is it the UAE is the one that leaked his information about his affair,
that's the rumor.
or that's huh?
When the UAE paid 1.3 million for a powerful, stealthy iPhone hacking tool in 2016, the monarchy's spies and the American mercenary hackers they hired put it to immediate use. The tool exploited a flaw in Apple's iMessage app to enable hackers to completely take over a victim's iPhone. It was used against hundreds of targets in a vast campaign of surveillance and espionage whose victims include geopolitical rivals, dissidents, and human rights activists. Documents filed by the U.S. Justice Department on Tuesday detail how the sale was facilitated by a group of American mercenaries working for Abu Dhabi without legal permission from Washington to do so. The case documents do not reveal who sold the powerful iPhone exploit to the Emiratis. Two sources with knowledge of the matter have confirmed to MIT that the exploit was developed and sold by an American firm named Accuvant. It merged several years ago with another security firm, and what remains is now part of a larger company called Optiv. Okay.
I shared that because I think there's a lot of focus on the Israeli firm and people even equating that it's run by the Israeli government, which it's not. And there's several firms out there. We don't hear the news about them. On the Android front, it's not even worth mentioning. It's so easy to hack on an Android front. But On the Apple iPhone front, there's several firms out there creating hacking tools. Maybe not as extensive as this, but they're out there. So Tyler, where's the link for that particular story?
For the which?
For the one you just
The
read
one
about?
you said, yeah.
I just tweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, that's super scandalous, but it goes to show that okay, well, what was the cost or return on investment for something like a nation state in that situation? So these walled gardens have this sometimes false sense of security because you think, oh, Apple's so impervious, but actually a lot of the exploit, as I understand to some extent, happened where this so-called security lays. So yeah, you can't access that layer as the user. Yeah, but the people who made the exploit can. So the OS, Apple, and the hackers can access data on your phone that you can't, which seems a little bit silly because I think we get too comfortable, and then people get when you get comfortable, you kind of open yourself up to these kind of attacks. So curious what Tom thinks about this after he's had a chance to read the article, or what others think.
So here's the thing. Everybody always says go Apple, it's unhackable. And to me, whenever you say something is unhackable, it's like you're inviting people in. Okay, the first person I started seeing doing a lot of Apple hacks was this guy Dino Dizovi. You know, and that's because that was his specialty. Everybody in this industry has their specialty. Okay, Apple exploits, are few and far between. And if you remember when Jonathan was coming in, these same exploits that they were trying to blame the Israelis on, they were also saying, you know, I don't know about that because he was challenging Citizens Labs for stuff to the point where they go and cancel people and try and shut people up. And that's just the name of the game. You know, I mean, if you go way back into this hacking industry, when I first got in, I like literally 2001, 2002, the hackers were literally going in, patching up their competitors' exploits, and then laying out their own to stay in there for a while. And it's constantly evolving. So anyone who thinks your Apple is not exploitable, all right, you keep thinking that, and then tell me what happens when you lose everything.
Okay, next tweet I have here is from Eric about a controversial new research suggests that COVID bears signs of genetic engineering from the economist.com.
Yeah, that was kind of the article that we were kind of talking around and with John Madison about. I think the narrative, obviously, in the media has changed. I think some people are like, I knew it, I knew it. But I think the point is that both countries couldn't do this work in isolation. So there's definitely an industry, and perhaps a better question here to ask is, what can we do to create better safeguards if we are messing around with these things, with viruses on these kind of pathogen function gain research? Some folks said, hey, why don't you go to a faraway place? Oh, well, people don't want to work in an isolated area. Maybe we can build an underground bunker, in some areas that might take too long for permits. So what kind of solutions people have? I think people just need to start talking about it a little bit more in the open and realize that, yeah, you can order a sequence of genetic like material. It comes over. They won't ship it to your home, most places. But in general, that's the kind of era that we live in. I think referring to it as the era of genetic information technology or genomics information technology is a good way to kind of label this era going forward. So that's
I
all.
you're suggesting to build a raccoon city. Is that what you're saying? Just
Well,
like
I love the Resident Evil movies. I love those movies.
You mean,
Always great.
wait, that's not Plum Island?
that one too. Solid, Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, I think it's important to really, in a world of whataboutism, which we live in today, um, the recent articles about Boston University Level 4 lab hybridizing the Omicron spike with the wild type virus. Um, it would be pretty hard for anybody to take a shot in the US to take a shot at China if indeed this was a lab escaped virus, which, if it did come out of the lab, it was an accident because China would not have developed a bioweapon in the form of a coronavirus without having and released it prior to having a vaccine available for the Chinese people, which they did not. And so, if it was a lab leak and we're going to raise that as an international contention, what was just reported about the Boston University lab and the BU lab has really tried to downplay the description, but they have not denied that they hybridized um, the spike protein from Omicron with a wild type virus. It would be really hard to defend that in view of the fact that these level 4 labs have had leaks in the past around the globe, wherever they exist, of experimental viruses. So we're in a situation. I mean, if anything, if anything, the Boston University revelation sort of should lower the temperature of any international dispute about who done it. We shouldn't be doing that kind of research in any labs anywhere in the world. But China is not alone in that kind of research. The U.S. is not alone in that kind of research. One would hope that compliance with level 4 safety standards is more strictly adhered to in some labs than others. But because compliance is a human factor issue, it's not a technical issue. It's a human factor issue. The most high tech level 4 lab experimenting with highly dangerous infectious agents is going to have failures and leaks because of the human factor. So and we've had this discussion as long as a year and a half ago that we need something equivalent to the IAEA for nuclear supervision for these labs. You can't ban this stuff. It just goes underground. What you have to do is you have to have compliant certification from an international body, and that's the only way we're going to get our hands around this. And the fact that Boston University has pretty much revealed that while they dispute the outcome of their research, they have not disputed the fact that they did that hybridization. And I have to say, I don't understand how more than one person thought that was a good idea at a single institution. Just, it's beyond me.
Oh,
And my understanding is that the Wuhan Institute was not functioning at a level 4, but more at a level 2. I heard it compared to the level of a dentist's office.
And part of the reason that the U.S. had funded the lab was reportedly. I mean, we'll never know the real truth to these. They're so politically charged. We'll never know ground truth unless we were part of the original design of the U.S. involvement in the Wuhan funding of the Wuhan lab. But it is not unreasonable to provide funding if that gives you access to understand what the risks are and how to help mitigate them. But the fact that this research is going on and even in a level 4 lab is very disturbing because the potential benefits to society of that research, I think, are woefully outweighed by the risks.
really? I think if you have something like robotics and automation, like I know some of the folks in the world who have the best labs. There's not a single person in there. It's all just robotics, all sealed off, quite safe. I think that's the solution to the person in the loop problem
Who
because
who who, who manages replacement of the robotics when they break? How does
another
that
generation
happen?
of super robots, and it's
Robots.
turtles all the way down. Turtles
Yeah,
all the way
robots.
down.
It's very
Robots
symbiotic.
repair robots. Yeah.
Yes, and then we have robots in governance to make sure that the super robots are doing what they're told to do.
I
Oh,
like to
so
throw
Exactly.
that into
That's a lot of
research.
jobs we need to make all those
Well,
robots.
who needs humans anyway?
So basically, Jeff Bezos would
I
buy.
mean, I do.
Right.
Okay.
Ooh, let's.
So IKEA plans to test drive, not plans, they are test driving
Hey Tyler,
robotic.
sorry. I just wanted to qualify the last comment I made. Who needs humans anyway? My point about robotic governance of robots that maintain robots that maintain robots. When you back the truck all the way up to governance, That's where values come in. That's where humans are indispensable. Um, and so uh, Eric, your point is you can make them safer with robotics, but all that will do is engender riskier research because, oh, it's safe, it's only robots. Then someone has to go repair a robot in a lab full of dangerous species. So I actually think
Sounds like
fast
an
solutions. I
amazing
think
Resident Evil movie.
sorry. Let me just land the plane here. It and there are many examples in software design where when people feel that they have a safety net um, that will prevent them from doing harm, they become very reckless because they know they have the safety net. But the safety net is never 100%. And so, if we had a robotic lab, people would do more and more and more dangerous experiments. And then, when a human hand or governance decision failed, the risk of that safety net failure um, based upon the escalation of risk taking becomes the problem itself. So this illusion of a perfect safety net does engender more dangerous behavior, and I think that's a very bad path to go down.
Hey, John, this is Elle. Can I ping you later? I actually have a digital worker project right now where I'm building governance. Can I ping you later?
I would love to talk to you about that. I'm actually
It's not
on
nothing as
I'm
strict as
work
science.
group at UC Berkeley on these very issues, so I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
So you're
Meanwhile, here I am building a robot to make automated measurements and manipulate viruses. So thanks, John. I'm going to have to think about this a lot more from the perspective of. I think it is a valid criticism, but I don't think we're going to stop this kind of research. I personally think there is much more value than we've only just gleaned the surface of what's possible. And it's not about doing riskier things, it's about doing more exciting things more safely. And if I have like 2, 3 layers of a lab with robots at each step or 2 steps with safeguards, I think that's better than having a bunch of people in a lab. Like I love working in a lab, but it is anxiety inducing if you're doing this kind of work. So just remove all the people, and I think a big part of that goes away. Regulation, I'd like to see that be regulated in the same way that we do kind of, I guess, nuclear research or nuclear fabrication. So you could make it algorithmic, perhaps. So from the onset, if everything is required to be done within a robotic environment or ecosystem, that might be an interesting point to consider or explore. Thanks.
But the one thing you forget is there's always this lovely thing called lawyers and researchers. When you put the two of them together, it's a dangerous mix. Because, and I'm not just saying in biological labs, because I do the same stuff on the cyber stuff. You look at how you stretch the limits because you look for loopholes within it. I mean, that's what I do all day long. How far can I stretch it? I mean, I've even had people tell me, Tom, the wind blows in the wrong direction, you're going to get arrested in some of your crazy ass freaking research.
Okay, my question is, what was the need to do such a recombinant experimentation with the dangerous virus? Coronavirus have been existing in bats and stuff for centuries without, coming in contact with human population. The only reason now we have this problem is because this experimentation were taking place inside a lab with humans interfering. So, what was the need for this? And where are we standing? Sorry, Ellie. Where are we standing in terms of ethics? What are the rules and regulation against such thing from happening ever again? And these people need to be not only identified but dealt with stringent laws so that they don't do such a thing again. There is a place for research for identification of RNA or DNA sequences which are naturally occurring in the environment so that you can develop protective measures against such infections. But to literally recombine DNA codes to create this kind of a so-called bioweapon does not have any ethical grounds. So altogether globally, everybody have to come together and place stop and halt such experimentation. And until that is done, people who are investing in such experiments should be also highlighted, because publicly we, as people, should know who is behind all this. It's not a good scenario to have these experimentation keep on going and developing these dangerous bioweapons for uh, you know humanity is at right now at the verge of perhaps extinction if they continue this way.
I've got a question for Eric or Eram or John. I went to a debate about this at Cambridge University probably 15 years ago. And the debate was between somebody who was very anti doing this type of experimentation because it can create potentially pandemic pathogens. And there was another chap who was very pro this type of experimentation. And his argument was, if we don't do this type of experimentation, then nature will create these types of mutations at some point anyway and throw them at us. So we'd better study them so we know how to deal with it when that happens. So what do you experts think about that? I mean, obviously you factored that in, John, when you mentioned the risk, the benefit to society, but really don't we have to study these things in order to be able to sequence and deal with them when they actually come from nature?
Yeah, so let me first say that there's a very positive rationale for doing gain of function research. So it goes like this. If we could hybridize the spike protein of Omicron with the original, or say the Delta virus, which appear to be more pathogenic, we still don't really know because you can't study that experimentally. But we suspect that the wild type was more pathogenic and the spike protein of the Omicron is more contagious. So it's the perfect mix. Then, if we found that that was a really dangerous combination, and you wouldn't determine that from testing mice, which is what Boston University did, because as clinical researchers often say, mice lie and macaques exaggerate. Transferring from animal studies to human studies is just not valid in this context. So, first of all, you can't do these experiments with high predictive value in non-human species. So that's number one. Number two, um, the infinite number of permutations of viruses that are just two mutations away from becoming zoonostic, meaning they jump from another species to humans around the globe, and the number of permutations of recombinations and mutations that could cause them to become a mass extinction kind of dangerous virus, are such that if you did succeed in creating such a strain ahead of nature, which is very very likely because we know what the most pathogenic parts are. We could experiment with them in the lab for years until we got it just right, so it was super contagious and super lethal. We could do that. There have been very few instances of nature generating that, and although they're increasing because of climate change and encroachment upon the bat populations, which are in fact indeed a stew of viruses. Bats have a very different immune system that tolerate these numerous viruses circulating in them at any point in time, so the recombination is a real threat. But the chances of us as humans discovering that um, in non-human species and being able to translate that to human species and then develop vaccines for all of those permutations so that we're prepared ahead of nature generating something that may not look exactly like what we did and what we prepared a vaccine for. I just think it's a fool's errand. People can argue the point, but heuristically, my belief is that the infinite number of permutations towards that end have not generated that many events in all of history. But if we turn billions of dollars of research labs into looking for that kind of thing, knowing that accidents happen and that the chances of it leaking even before we get a vaccine, which if in fact the coronavirus was a Wuhan lab leak, that's exactly what happened, is that they got a lab leak way in advance of having effective vaccines. Um, I just think the balance of risk and benefits is tilted towards risk and not benefits. Number one. Number two, um, is the fact that even with robotics, as we were talking about earlier with Eric, that safety net phenomenon only engenders more risk taking. So I still think the only way to manage this, you can't outlaw it. So I disagree with the assertion that it should be illegal, because that's never stopped any bad behavior. It only mitigates it, and the deterrent factor is not that high. What we really need is international agreements that where these labs exist, no matter what they're doing, that they're subject to external review, because the kind of thing that just happened at Boston University, and the full story and the full disclosure is not out yet. So I'm open to the fact that maybe they didn't do anything dangerous at all, but I think what they've already revealed is very, very, very worrisome, and that just illustrates the point. Why do such a thing? Because the chances of then being able to say, "Oh, this is going to what we engineered is going to emerge through natural evolution anyway," and then have time to develop a vaccine and be prepared for it, when there's an estimated 10,000 viruses globally, that are potentially sources for this kind of problem. I just think it's a fool's errand. I don't see it. It's more about oversight to prevent those accidents from happening, and to hopefully restrict the level of risk taking and experimentation that goes on, or we will generate that rare, once in a millennium event that wipes out half the human population. I think the risk of that happening out of one of these labs is leaking is far greater than the risk of nature generating it.
That
To
analysis is really on target, but I've been reading about this for the last 2.5 years pretty carefully, and have not seen that in the literature. So just estimate estimate all those parameters. What is the number of different um, viruses that could come about in nature. Um, what at what rate are we getting through these viruses and actually making variations of them that could be harmful to the human population? Just like one by one, estimate the parameters and just come up with an estimation of how how much good could you even do by even starting on this kind of research. I haven't seen that in the literature at all.
Exactly. That's my point too. And Ben, what a great question. What is the need for combining a virus which exists in bats with human DNA, providing it the capacity or capability to infect human beings? In nature, I'm not sure whether that process could have ever occurred or happened. And even if it would have, the process would not be this fast. It takes ages, millennia, and centuries for viruses and these, prions or whatever to evolve. So we created this by ourselves. Human beings created it now. That's what it looks like. I haven't read the entire, detailed analysis yet, but if the recombination happened in a lab, prior to that recombination, the virus did not have the capacity to infect humans. And I am now totally against this kind of experimentation. There is no valid reason in my mind to do such a thing. Yes, you can study what is naturally existing in the environment, in animals and stuff, but to combine it with human DNA, totally a no for me. I'm totally against it.
So, John, you answered one class of answer to the question, which is how helpful is it in staying ahead, guessing ahead of nature, what nature creates? But is there not another benefit in that does none of this research support the ability to respond when a virus comes out in nature? For instance, when SARS came out and how quickly it was sequenced and dealt with, is none of this research supporting our ability to understand and respond to something rather than trying to guess ahead of time?
Well, yeah, and that's why I said that, um, with 10,000 viruses that are identified as non-human viruses that are at risk of jumping into the human species with permutations that are contagious and lethal, the number of permutation, and they're constantly they're all constantly evolving. So, if you solve the problem today, you solve the problem today. 10 years from now, you'd have to start over with those 10,000 because they will have evolved and mutated. And so, to the extent that you want to try and do that, and to the extent that you could say, okay, well, if we identify it before nature creates it, we can create the vaccines for that. Are we really going to create vaccines for say 500 permutations of 10,000 viruses globally and update them every 5 years? I mean, it's so impractical. Number one. Number two, if a new virus emerged today that was of great concern, and let's just say the Omicron virus variant, we had that sequenced very, very soon after it emerged. So we know what the threat is today pretty quickly. What we need to do is compress the cycle time of sharing that genetic sequence with the world, implementing a compressed schedule of developing a vaccine, compress the cycle time of testing that for safety, and then t- uh, uh, accelerate the cycle time for scaling up production of that virus. I think that is an incredibly difficult problem that needs a lot of focus, but it's far easier than the problem of anticipating which of those 500 permutations of 10,000 viruses is going to lead to something that we might want to have a vaccine on the shelf for. Because with current technology, we've seen that we can shorten the cycle time of vaccine production uh, dramatically. And under those circumstances, I'll put my money on a rapid response and scaling and distribution and vaccination campaign over the risks of actually generating the problem we're trying to avoid.
Well, I would say there's still one reason why understanding why function gain is important. When we add information to a sequence, the proteins and structures that emerge can behave differently in different situations. What a protein does is really a local property. So we really have to be doing these kind of tests on site where the interactions of the molecules occur. So that part is inescapable. And I've asked folks even from NASA to see, hey, are you folks doing simulations? Like that's a thing. I love simulations. Can't we just do that? And they said no. Simulations are unreliable. They always go back to the empirical data. So they're just models. So I don't know how you could even understand some of these systems if you're not already doing that work, which then kind of primes the bioeconomy to have these elements of industrialized production of genetics as a service that you can just get through the mail or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, but we realize now that vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, wasn't even needed if there was this virus was not there until the lab created it and it escaped, and then we needed the vaccine. And yes, I appreciate that we have the capacity now to scale and produce vaccine at a very fast pace, but the basic point holds that there was no need for the vaccine until this virus was created and escaped. And prior to this pandemic, what other viruses were, spread out in this way a long time ago? Were they,
Spanish flu.
huh?
Yeah, yeah, and let me just make a related point. So the one area where I think the kind of research that the proponents, where I would agree with them, the one element is if we can do in silico research, not um, in vivo. I mean, not in test tubes. Um, if we could do that in silico for humans, that would be quite valuable. That would be incredibly valuable. And that technology is emerging, and with AI and everything, that's the path we should take, because you can't do these experiments with potentially lethal viruses with human subjects. The human immune system, the human genome, is so sufficiently distinct from every other species That's why the meme of mice lie and macaques exaggerate is universally true. You cannot take animal studies and say, oh, well, it worked in mice, therefore it will work in humans. The majority of time, it doesn't transfer, and it's more reliable to use primates. But are we going to begin uh, raising primates for the sole purpose of being closer to humans for experimentation with these kind of projects? I sure hope not. I think that would be profoundly unethical, number one, and profoundly misleading in terms of how closely that resembles transfer, because there are a lot of viruses in humans that don't go to primates, and there are a lot of viruses in primates that don't go to humans easily. And so, I think we should absolutely invest in modeling this stuff in silico, but not in vivo in mice or chimps or humans.
Yeah, that is my point, that these viruses can stay in bats or rats forever. They've been staying there for centuries until we combined our DNA with them, providing them that vehicle or the bridge to transfer over into us. There was no need for that. And now this kind of entire, bag of worms coming out, I'm really kind of asking anybody who's listening to put some kind of stop to it. There is no need for this. We don't need another pandemic. Nothing good comes out of this kind of experimentation, in my opinion. And the models, AI-based models or artificial, perhaps test tube experimentations are okay, but the live combination technology where you're combining human DNA with these, animal based or any other codes, not a good thing.
It just
Okay.
intuitively something feels off with it. I don't know. I mean, there's clearly some benefit. It's like studying fire. It feels like saying we shouldn't study fire in a lab in case we set fire to things. But a lot of what you're taught when you learn to be a fireman comes from research of people studying flame in control conditions. I mean, it's completely different, and you can't abstract it to this. But in general, the idea that you shouldn't study something does not seem progressive. There are risks and there are rewards. I just think we need an analytical and numeric way. I haven't heard any numbers in any of this. Well, one or two from John.
Well, the
I've
analogy
got,
to
I,
fire would
I'm
only
not
be
hearing
correct if the
a risk
fire could spread
analysis.
from one person to another, right? That's the
Sure,
problem with it.
fire spreads, but the point is, I think that we just need to make sure that we come up with an analytical and arithmetic argument there are benefits, so let's state them and work out what the numbers are of those benefits realistically and model that out, and then let's state the risks and work out what those are, and then tally the numbers against each other. That's what, because intuitively it doesn't feel right to say don't study something because it's dangerous to study it. That's antithesis of how I've led my entire life. If I find something that's risky, I go study it and examine it and take it apart and then go and do it anyway, like shutting engines off on
So how
planes
much
and
money
setting yourself on
evaporated?
fire. And
So how much
so,
money evaporated because of the pandemic? Do folks estimate? I've heard numbers ranging from 3 trillion to 20 trillion. So that's one number to put up on the board. That hey, that's the cost of a pandemic.
This is
And
Well,
human
man-made.
there's also
lives.
people who benefited
Human
from it, and
lives.
that's
and
something to
and the,
consider with respect to weighing all these factors as well.
yeah, and the
This is
planet quite
man-made.
enjoyed
This
the
is a
pandemic.
result of going against nature.
From this, hey, this is Elle. From the security aspect point, I know a lot of times in like with the military and stuff like this, and their with their scientists and stuff, they believe that the next pandemic is going to, be used against us intentionally, like biowarfare. So they create things, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that they create things because they try to think like the bad guys. Like if they're going to mix this together, if they're going to put this together, they want to try to mitigate against it. So that's why they study these and try to, think like the criminals. Like what would they do? We need to create something that'll, at least stem off some of these viruses if they do occur. Not saying that it's right, but I know from the security standpoint, that's why they typically study it. I don't know about creating, but studying it, that's why they do it.
How
And
much is
we really think this is Robert, and we really think that this new world
our shifting new world order is going to follow international rules as we start to decouple?
Great question.
Exactly. It
Oh,
only takes one.
sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Well, the
I
rumors
was just going
are
to say it only takes one.
China is rumored to be already marching forward with genetic engineering in ways that violate kind of to whatever degree genetic engineering standards can be set today.
Do we know how much better the world is prepared, laboratory wise, and counter ways of making medicines for this from
Oh
before?
no, they're severely. They're not ready. I mean, this past pandemic showed that no one was ready.
Has there been an improvements in laboratories that are just infiltrated with more help? Is that happening?
I will say from Homeland Security, some of the stuff they're doing, they're trying to work on more governance and hire more auditing bodies to go and audit those areas or those places that are deemed facilities where they study this. I know that other countries, because of this, now because there's a lot of places in the world that do not have their own labs, do not have the pharmaceutical space to even create it or even the knowledge to. So now there is reinvestment into their own infrastructure for that. But where they are with it, no. But this pandemic did teach a lot of lessons.
Okay,
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Google and Eric, you had this one. Google and Stanford propose a novel approach for distilling classifier-free guided diffusion models with high sampling efficiency.
Yeah, so in terms of like how you would use these kinds of models, I think the way that most people use it in a workflow is to run many simulations and they pick out things, but to the paper goes into some detail about how to make those parameter choices and different ways of abstracting that. So I thought that that was something cool to mention for folks. If they wanted to go into that detail, I did find like learning a little bit about neural networks, for example, and understanding that a neuron is kind of like the chain rule. What it does next kind of depends on what it's doing now. And just that rough understanding about a chain rule with respect to derivatives and then groups of neurons, that kind of led to a more intuitive level of understanding of how functions are synthesized within a neural network. So a similar kind of feeling of abstract enlightenment occurred here for me, so thought I'd share it.
Okay, next up from a May. People in tech space sometimes underestimate. Okay, here, L'Oreal, the makeup company, and Meta launch a metaverse startup accelerator. The program, which will support creative startups in fields such as augmented reality and avatar creation, signals L'Oreal commitment. And I have to imagine L'Oreal is understandably a little bit concerned about how we're not going to need makeup in the far future if we're living in a metaverse, but potentially they can make digital makeup of some kind, which is what the photo kind of demonstrates. This really wild kind of an enhancement of a model's eyes in this really cool digital way. It's really, really captivating photo, actually. Anyway, next is from Thomas Tong. Bill Gates backed startup builds a massive refinery to turn alcohol into jet fuel. And from Jeff G. has an article from The Guardian. The headline reads Sharp Fall in China's Global Standing as polls shows backing for Taiwan defense. A survey finds pro-China sentiment has collapsed in many nations while positive opinion of U.S. has rebounded. And Tomiko's article from Y Combinator says ByteDance, which is the parent of TikTok, planned past tense to use TikTok to surveil specific American citizens. And Thomas Tong has this one from The Guardian that exposure to environmental toxins may be the root of rise in neurological disorders. Doctors warn exposure to omnipresent yet poorly understood chemicals such as microplastics could play a role in dementia.
Well, I've been talking about this for the past 7 years. It's in my bio. Chemicals, microplastic, and other toxins that are just a regular part of our daily diet and routine, and in our cleaning supplies around the house, even the effervescence and all the air freshener and stuff. We are surrounded by these toxic chemicals, and they kind of affect not only our health at the cellular level, also affect our metabolic pathways, our energy generation, and so much more. And affects these effects over time accumulate and cause not only dementia and other neurodegenerative disorders, but just reduce our health and uh, lifespan. Our American male and female lifespan has gone down by average in the past few years, because I think in US there are so many preservatives and chemicals that are allowed which are banned in other countries, and it's about time that people in power take some regulatory actions against the inclusion of such chemicals in our food and our agriculture industry.
I
So,
just want to
Aram or
mention one
anyone, you
thing.
said something about life expectancy going down in the U.S. Is that 3 months, 6 months, year or two? What's the figure?
Several years. Several years. I don't remember the numbers at the top of my head, but it has gone down several years.
I just want to make a comment. Because I'm sure most of us have been wearing masks for the past 2-3 years. So I'm in Kyoto now. So today I actually was trying to take a walk back, from where I was back to home, and I walked for about an hour, and because it was usually pretty dark in Kyoto, so I tried to walk along the main roads, and because there's no one around me, so I took off my mask to walk. But I realized that my lungs become very sensitive to all these toxins from the vehicle. I feel pretty bad after that walk. So I'm not sure whether is it because we have been masking for so long that our lungs are not conditioned to even the minimum degree of toxins from these vehicles along the way. We got very sensitive, so I think we all have to be careful because
You
we have
can
a
buy
few
like little
patients.
filters for your nose, like you just put them into your nose, and it's basically like a little HEPA filter, and that works really well. Asia, I think, notoriously is. I've heard it once described as being like in some parts of Asia, the air quality is so poor that it's equivalent to being amongst cigarette smokers in a field. So that's kind of
Yeah, I
in
think
terms of the air
Kyoto's
quality. But not
air.
Japan.
Yeah, I think Kyoto air is quite good, but I'm just saying that because we are so clean these days, because we have been wearing masks, right? Our lungs are so clean, but just a little bit of this toxins is just going to like cause a bigger impact on us than usual
Yeah, yeah.
because,
Sure.
yeah,
Just like in Taiwan, we still right now, even today, we still are asked to wear masks. It's still mandate, and just like you said, so now the kids will go back to school, and because in the past 2 years they all wore masks, so right now even the little like cold flu they got it quickly because they
yeah.
yes, so maybe a little bit just we rather play with the dirt thing last week,
Yes, I was
right?
just about to mention.
Yeah. Bingo. So
It's
I
a bit
think
to be
maybe we
dirty, right? Sometimes.
yeah we need to go back to the normal life
Yeah, to build our own
gradually.
immune system again.
Yeah,
Yes.
so the immune system can
Right.
restore again.
Just take
Well,
care,
unfortunately, I
y'all.
think the definition of toxicity, though, is changing, and I think this is kind of what Aaron was maybe perhaps leaning towards or would support. That we used to think that, hey, you needed a certain parts per million for it to be a worrisome case. Now it seems that just even one interaction can be harmful and result in disease for some people. So, I think we just have to be a little bit more careful, because if your lungs are that sensitive, what did you get used to breathing in, and was that a good thing, right? So that's what I would ask.
Exactly. It's the parts per million kind of narrative in the past, in 1990s when they started spraying all these chemicals and using in agriculture. The study shown that okay, the usage, the quality, I mean the quantity was safe for human consumption, but they never did any study of the aggregates of that exposure. Like over time, that lower grade exposure 7 to 8 years later resulted in such pathological responses in the human body that kind of depleted the immune system. It affected the metabolic health of mitochondria and so on and so forth. So the accumulation of parts per million over time is a problem. Subclinical effects of this exposure to chemical is a problem, and that kind of is like inhaling or eating a poison in lower quantities that over time kills you. It doesn't kill you right away, but over time, that exposure is very deleterious to your health.
And compounding the issue is the fact that we have a single global atmosphere, we have a single global set of oceans, we have um, as global food supply chains. And so, if there is a particular byproduct of um, human creation that um, is indeed highly toxic, it's extremely difficult and increasingly so to tease it out from amongst all of the other toxins that are globally distributed
We
through the
basically
atmosphere and
messed up
through the
almost
oceans
every
and through the
aspect of
food
the model
supply chains, and
when
not to
everything
mention the
is
fish
messed
that
up.
come from
And
the ocean.
the matter of
Um,
fact, it's the food,
and
the
so
sink,
it
when
becomes
it runs around
very,
the
very
and every part of it
increasingly
falls.
difficult with all the
See,
stuff that is
on the
becoming
floor, so
pervasive in the air and the
you
water and in
see
the food supply to really
see
understand
or
what
then you
is
cover
causing
it
what. And then further to compound
one
that,
it's first
there's
I
all
was
kinds
or
of
and was
examples
delivering this with
where
those versus
two
17 with 2017
toxins in some way that are relatively low toxicity individually become highly toxic in combination. When you look at the permutation, the combinatorial explosion
that
of
manufacturer
permutations
realized when
of the toxins that are in low quantities
more
in the
about
air, in the water, in the food supply chain,
more about
being able to
manufacturing
disambiguate and identify what the problem actually is with a background noise of disease in the human population itself, we're increasingly playing with fire, dumping this stuff into the air and the water, and it is the part of the existential threat associated with climate change is that we have, as a species, exploited our brains to build the tools to create the new stuff to advance civilization, but being very negligent in terms of the downside risks of how we dispose of all of these new creations in ways that don't result in this pervasive low level contamination of everything, 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 and the increasing difficulty of disambiguating what's really toxic at low levels and what's not.
Playing with fire, literally and
Exactly, and we don't
figuratively
know
due to
where and
climate
how.
change.
It's yeah,
But that
we need.
speaks to the yeah, but that speaks to the interconnectedness of all these problems and how they just sort of impede on one another in unpredictable ways.
By the way, Cheryl just pinned an article I gave her from the New York Times, and I think I back channeled somebody else from some other document from actually it was from the CDC. So I guess life expectancy has declined by 3 years in the last 3 years, but they're blaming mostly COVID, and then secondarily they're blaming things like drug overdoses and violence and stuff, other things.
Exactly.
This is
Well, it's
Well, they
important.
can.
It's important to recognize, though, that the decline in life expectancy due to COVID should be a one-time hit, would be a one-time hit, were it not for the fact that the number one risk factor in the VA study for heart disease now is a history of COVID, far in excess of cholesterol and hypertension and diabetes, and the number and a persistent risk of type 2 diabetes in adults and a 40% increase in type 1 diabetes in children in the just the 1 month um, after being infected with COVID. So the long tail of long COVID from this pandemic is going to have a persistent decrement in life expectancy in what with other causes would be only associated while the insult was active. The insult of COVID is going to last for a long time, even if the pandemic ended tomorrow.
And
Okay.
the issues with the metabolic disorders and death causes embedded in not only the lifestyle but exposure to such toxins over time was way before COVID. The number one cause of death was cardiovascular event or stroke, which is again not related to COVID. So these changes in chemical exposure started in 1990s. The studies are way before that, proving that these chemicals are not safe for human beings in certain quantities. So the argument was that the quantities that are used are safe, and over time accumulation was never considered, and that is the point here. So they can include COVID numbers for the past 2 years, but there is nothing else that is going to kind of save them from the data from the years prior to that, going back to 90s.
Well, Aram, I actually thought, quite frankly, like in the 1990s, that maybe the increase in cardiovascular risk was due to McDonald's supersizing everything. Supersized fries, things like that.
And the sugar.
Oh yeah, sugar is just, yes, one thing. It's the accumulation of so many things. Sugar is another number one toxin in my mind. It's a toxin for me, completely poisonous.
Okay, last tweet of the day is from Poppy, and huge thanks to Poppy for keeping the awesome tweets going. There was an updated version of Amazon's shopping cart, and videos are going around. I saw some today. Sensors in the shopping cart use AI powered cameras and barcode scanners to identify whatever you put in or take out and create a live receipt in real time on the display on the handle of the cart. So you can see your total as you shop, and you can talk to it through Alexa and ask it what aisle is the peanut butter on, for example, or where is the peanut butter, and it will not only show you which aisle, but where on the aisle and guide you to it. And somebody made a video of throwing, literally tossing like a basketball, objects into the cart to see if it could scan and recognize the objects at that speed, and in fact it can. So, and then you can take them out just as fast, and it removes it from your total on the cart. And many people are calling it the future of shopping. Looks very cool.
Oh,
Anyway,
Tyler, can I just add one thing that I'm sure you'll be interested in? I know you touched on it a little bit early today, but this is kind of intraday. The Wall Street Journal just kind of interjected with a calculation that intraday today, from the close on Friday to where we are now, the five largest Chinese ADRs, and ADR is called, means an American Depository Receipt. It's how sometimes foreign companies trade on U.S. exchanges. So companies like Alibaba, those five largest ADRs today have lost, just today, since Friday, $55 billion in market cap. As a kind of reaction to the extension of the term of the president over there. And I think Alibaba's down like 15% just today.
yeah. Okay, we did it, everybody. And Ben is doing it too over at
Yes.
the link at the top of the room, energy efficiency of cars. So you can join him there, or join us here tomorrow, and we'll do it again. Thank you, everybody.